Welcome everyone to this panel on Islamic ethics and the healthcare of the children in the genetics era. So it's a very challenging and interesting topic. So if you are not too shy, just come closer to the front. There's plenty of space for you, and this way you could be more involved in the questions. We encourage you to ask any questions you have throughout the panel. This is a 75 minutes panel, so anytime you have a question popping up in your mind, you can either send it through the chat box on the app of Wish, or you can scan a QR code that's supposed to be showing on the screen at some point during the panel, and it will direct you to where you can send your questions, or you can simply do it the old way, raise your hand, and someone will bring you the mic. I welcome my panelists. I have with me Dr. Muhammad Ghali, Professor of Islam and Biomedical Ethics at Hamad bin Khalifa University here in Qatar. Dr. Ahmed Al-Badawi, bioethicist at the National Bioethics Committee of Sultan Qaboos University in Oman. Professor Sir Mark Caulfield, Vice Principal of Health, Professor of Clinical Pharmacology at Queen Mary University of London, and CEO of Barts Life Sciences in the UK, Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia, President of the Pontifical Academy of Life in the Vatican. And with us virtually, my dear friend Raya Al-Jadir, author of Disability Horizons, joining us from the UK. She was a fellow with me at the Carter Fellowships. Hi, Raya. So advancements in genetics and genomics have been provided great opportunities for improving children's health, overall well-being of their families. The testings, prenatal, premarital, prevented a lot of disease, reduced genetic disease. But at the same time, many Muslims want to harvest the benefits of these tests, but in a way that aligns also with their religious beliefs and moral convictions. So since the beginning of the 1990s, Muslim religious scholars, in collaboration with biomedical scientists, have been examining the ethical questions surrounding genetic testing. And this is why we have some of the best in the field to answer our questions. Dr. Ghali, can you tell us briefly about why is it important that we approach the genetic testing in children from an Islamic point of view?
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much for having us here and for organizing this. Before starting answering the question, I want to submit my due thanks to the colleagues who worked on this study and this report. It wouldn't have been possible without them. Mrs. Maha El-Akoum, she played a key role in this study. She was the focal point with everyone. She contributed intellectually to the report as well, and of course to the geneticists, without whom we wouldn't have been able to understand properly what genetics is. Dr. Fawzan, Dr. Masha'il, Dr. Khalid, Dr. Tawfiq, and of course to Dr. Samia Al-Abdullah, who is leading the premarital genetic screening program here in Qatar. As for the significance of the topic, there are different factors that make this a topic quite important in general, in Islamic ethics in particular, and more particularly in the Gulf region. First of all, genetics is one of the fields that could creep into all aspects of our life, not only in healthcare. So we discuss in this study about genetics and marriage, that the good genes, the bad genes, between brackets, would help you determine the good or the bad fitting, unfitting partner. We have now, even at the philosophical level, genetic determinism, genetic reductionism. I suppose we have geneticists here. If you ask an average geneticist, does genetics have a role in this or in that aspect in life? They will tell you it has role in every aspect, but sometimes bigger role, sometimes smaller role. But there is no aspect in life, even intelligence, whatever, that will not have. We have books like Gene of God. We have books like What Genes Cannot Do. So it's everywhere in our life. And Islam as a religion has the same claim. that Islam also has a say about everything in our life. So they will intersect with each other, no question. About children in particular, children are categorized in Islamic ethical thought as a vulnerable group. They are non-mukallaf, as we say. They are not held accountable in front of God for what they are doing. And vulnerable groups are entitled to more protection. And one of the very advanced field in genetics is about children. So how to make benefit of this technology without affecting the rights and the best interests of these children. Many of them didn't come to life yet. So this is also another important and significant difficulty that we need to address. The Gulf region, lastly, Gulf region has, comparatively speaking, with other countries around the world, high rates of children born with genetic conditions. This causes difficulties for the family, people around them, the married couples, the parents, and also for the healthcare budget, the national healthcare budget. Everyone here, every citizen is covered by health insurance. So every one of these stakeholders would say, why wouldn't make use of these genetic advancements in order to minimize the suffering? This is all good, but of course there are ethical aspects that need to be addressed according to the moral world, which makes part of people's culture and religious commitment here in this region, and here comes Islamic ethics.
Sir Mark Koffel, this is not a question of only Islam. Protecting children, their rights is also in so many states that value human life and that take a nation-state approach in protecting its citizen. So when we talk about the inclusion of genomic data and the electronic health records of patients, there are questions of privacy, of what does it say for the future, discrimination they might face, and so on. What are the main ethical challenges related to sharing genomic data, and how is this being tackled?
So Rawa, I agree with your precept that this is for the whole of humanity, not for any particular group. And in fact, it's only by us creating a coalition of intellects that span the globe that we will responsibly and ethically use this data. To your question, I think that the WISH report authored by people here is a really good document exploring all the issues. So it's a great read if people haven't read it. I led the 100,000 Genomes project in the United Kingdom for 8 years. And the ethical concepts that underpin that were vitally important. I think the first thing to do is to assemble the public and patients and ask them what they think, and then also alongside, in parallel, ask the ethicists. It's very important to take into account, when we approach the application of genomics in healthcare, what the people who will be benefiting or perhaps not from the outcome think. So involving people who are affected by disease actually is an important thing. Also taking into account ethical and societal groups. So what we did to manage this long term, Rawa, is to set up a ethics advisory group that was not an ethics committee as such, but it was a group of bioethicists like two of our panelists here who assembled, and we consulted on every matter to get a broad ethical and societal debate going. And when we needed to, we consulted the public and patients. And the precepts that we tested was that if you are measuring a whole genome, which is as much of your genetic code as there is, it's the blueprint for our lives. It can sadly also contain variation that may lead to susceptibility to disease. If you're going to do that and you want to follow someone for their entire life course, you have to imagine the genetic makeup of that person. It can be interrogated at multiple time points to reveal different things that may have health benefits or not to that individual, may tell you about risk of diseases. And when you're doing that, you do need to take that to public and patient consultation so people understand what will happen. So in our consent, for example, we incorporated a very broad consent to work on any disease or any exposure that we detected, and we follow every one of the 90,000 plus people longitudinally for their life course with their health record. And so all the people are followed indefinitely, and they can decide at any point to opt out, as is appropriate ethically. They may decide to withdraw from the study, but they're in the study for their life course. And the reason for this is there may be things that we detect which initially we don't fully understand, but with further research on such data resource, we may be able to answer the health problems for the future of humanity. If we don't do that, we may not be able to answer those, and therefore we may end up with patients not getting the benefit they should. So the argument that we used is that we can't say today all the things that we'll find, but what we can say is if we find new things, we will come back and ask you, do you want to know these things? And involving them at every stage draws them with you. There is a precept which is in most countries in the world, which is that when you are a young child, your mum and dad give consent on your behalf, and you assent, but that when you reach sometime between 14 to 18, you should have a say on whether you want to continue in the study. So we have to reconsent every child. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the program I'm talking about, we're focused on rare disease. Rare diseases kill 1/3 of children before their 5th birthday if they have a rare disease. 1 in 17 of the people, at least in Qatar, will have a rare disease. Many of these diseases you can live with, but you're physically and intellectually disabled. So it's difficult to adequately describe to the audience the strength of feeling of the participants about how their health data is used positively and their strong support when they're consulted, involved, and part of the co-creation of the solutions, how much they really value doing this and actually really want it done elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Not everyone feels that way, and therefore it's important that we consult with people and that people have a choice as to whether they are involved or not, to respect their autonomy.
Mm-hmm. A side, very light note, my recommendation is for those teenagers that you ask them again after 18, because they will probably also change their mind.
So Rawa, you're spot on. Most studies that have done this have a substantial loss of participants between the ages of 16 and 18. And then suddenly they re-engage from about 18 to 21. And this is because they're preoccupied elsewhere, on their iPads, whatever it is, but they don't see it as important. And suddenly they start to become a bit more health conscious. So we're very fortunate. We did lose some people in the study, but we've regained them once they see the benefits.
Interesting. I thought it was a random comment from me. Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia, what are some of the main ethical issues to relating genetic testing in children, particularly from the Christian perspective?
Thank you. Let me begin to talk about ethics by highlighting a cultural aspect that is often overlooked. It is clear that biotechnology offers significant opportunities. At the same time, however, it tends to consider the person in a simplified fashion in order to make him or her more easily analyzable, controllable, and useful in a given context. This goes not only for children, but for the entire spectrum of living beings, and not only humans. Our responsibility in this area covers not only what we know through scientific research, but also how we know. Trying to correct malfunctions or even to improve performance leads to living beings becoming machines that are as productive as possible. This is a utility-based approach which quickly risks becoming prey to economics. For this reason, we have to be careful that the adoption of genetic diagnostic and therapy does not lead to a reductive vision of the human person. The life and health of a person is certainly influenced by his or her genetic structure, but the person is not just genes. Epigenetics tells us that the expression of a person's genetic makeup is the result of the interaction among different factors. The interweighing of innate and acquired elements is particularly relevant with regard to complex personality characteristics, such as a person's intellectual quotient. Moreover, the technological resources now available to medicine have radically altered the way we consider the transmission of life, generation, and affiliation. My reference to genetics, epigenetics, medicine, and the parent-child relationship, especially the mother, help us understand that we cannot ignore the overall context, which is biomedical, socioeconomic, and cultural, if we want to understand the full meaning of the biotechnologies that genetic engineering offers. The transmission of human life is not simply a biological fact, nor is that the patrimony that is transmitted simply genetic. Together, they provide us with the meaning of existence and the way in which cultures and religions understand it. We see in the attitude that we have toward the generation and acceptance of children, in our entire relationship with life and more generally with the future, not only as concerns the parents, but also the whole of society. Having children is not the only form of fertility. Fruitfulness implies a wider openness and commitment to life, especially as concerns the most helpless among us. A new and disruptive factor that we see in the progressive blurring of the line between diagnosis and screening. While diagnosis focuses on find specific diseases in individuals with highlighted risk profiles, screening is used on larger groups, analyzing ever larger segments of the genome. The information collected makes it possible to identify and eliminate genetic variants that are considered disadvantageous, even if it is not clear they can actually be considered pathological. This results in a sort of preventive eugenics similar to instances seen in the past. To understand this new factor, we need to be clear about a number of things: the individual's biological data, the healthcare services that a sick person can access, and a more generalized understanding of genetics in the overall vision of the human person and of the societal grouping to which the person belongs. The perfection-oriented approach, with inevitable control and conformity, that is reflected in this new factor, risks inducing an erroneous conception of the human condition as if one could eliminate the limitation, the imperfection, the vulnerability that is intrinsic to the human condition, and then makes mutual care and protection necessary. It is against this background that we have to evaluate genetic diagnosis, the costs and benefits for individual and the public health, the methods of managing information and respect for the autonomy of patients proportionate to age and family situations. Finally, in the Christian perspective, therefore, nature is entrusted to man who is free to intervene, but only according to criteria that respect the dignity of the person and the right to life in an atmosphere of acceptance and care for all involved.
Dr. Al-Badawi, you were part of the ethics committee in Oman who worked on the premarital testing policies in the Sultanate. Can you share your experience? What were the main ethical challenges you faced?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much for inviting me in this session and to be part of the panel discussion. And the organizers. The concept, the family, having a healthy child, free from inherited disorders, inherited blood disorders, such as thalassemia and sickle cell disease, was the main concern in the whole region, in the Gulf countries and beyond. And so from 1973, if I am not mistaken, the movement of making premarital screening compulsory, mandatory, was started with Sardinia and then Greece and the other regions. Why? Because the number of children born with inherited blood disorders was very alarming. And as a mother or as a family, we are all aware that the suffering is too much to bear. To have 3 children, all with sickle cell disease or thalassemia. This triggered the movement of mandatory premarital screening. So from 1924, the regions started implementing mandatory premarital screening as compulsory before one gets married. That was the first ethical dilemma. And I'm talking on behalf of Omani, where we are, like the other GCC countries, tribal, communal society, whereby when you said compulsory, mandatory, it means that you cannot get married if the results are abnormal. And that was the wrong definition. There was a wrong concept from day one to have a negative attitude. And that's why a number of GCC countries, with the exception of Bahrain later on, are still nowhere compared with Bahrain and Sardinia and Italy of the success rate, where it becomes almost 0.4% free from inherited blood disorders for the newly born babies. The reason was that Italy, Sardinia, Iran to some extent, Turkey, accepted the concept of mandatory primary screening. But in the Gulf, it was wrongly taken, because in Arabic we said فحص الطبي قبل الزواج. بمعنى فحص الطبي قبل الزواج, it is compulsory to do the test. You have to do the test, like the way screening, like the way you have to do polio, smallpox, or let's say COVID-19 passport. You have to have 2 doses. It's a compulsory. But then, when the results are abnormal, and you are still want to get married, want to go to get on with a couple, or the lady, the couples still want to get married, then it cannot be compulsory. So our definition is compulsory for screening, but أخذ عن النتيجة ليس إجباري. Taking the results is optional. So during the counseling, you may go ahead with the marriage or you may not. But doing the test, now that was the first ethical dilemma we were faced of mandatory screening. And the second dilemma was WHO, Article 4.1, which says that governments should not mandate it. It should be optional for premarital screening. That was, now there was a loophole. But that one was not as severe as the third issue of timing. Now, people, before the couples, when they've decided to get married, 1 week before the marriage, they go and do the screening. They've already paid the mahar. Mahar is
Dowry?
right, the money.
Dowry, I think.
Dowry.
Yeah.
You have already paid the dowry. You have furnished your houses. You have committed yourself. You have published the cards, invitation, and everything, and you have booked the hall and everything. Just 1 week before the D-Day, the results are not compatible. Should you go ahead? And that was the biggest dilemma.
Never cancel a wedding. Never cancel a wedding for.
So, not only that, the stigmatization. More serious, the stigmatization. So you cancel the wedding, and that's why when the Gulf countries started mandatory screening, it was not very successful because timing was very poor, and people could not cancel it. وبعدين عندنا what we call it قضاء وقدر لا, leave it to God. So this was a bigger challenge.
Because it was presented in a very basic way to people. Like they would consider that, oh, they are sick. No, they're not sick. They're just not compatible.
That is another issue of awareness, which is my second point. So the timing was very poor. There are documented papers in reputable journals. For example, in one country, I don't want to mention the name, 70% of recorded preliminary screening, it turned out that 21% did not even do it. They just got the certificate because they have no time. They went to the clinic, they bribed or whatever it is, whether it is the technical staff is a brother, is a cousin, they got the certificate that they are free from inherited blood disorders. They get married, and after first pregnancy, second pregnancy, the results are not compatible. So where did he get it from? And then it was realized that it was fake policies. The reason was timing promoted this. There were cases in one of the GCC countries where the results were not compatible, and a girl was about to commit suicide because the stigmatization was too much. And the biggest issue was awareness. For example, in Oman, in 2014, 53.3% were aware of the premarital screening. And then 2021, 3 months back, 79% are aware about it. But still, with the population of Oman of about 5 million, and there's not, from 10 families, 2 or 3 have got thalassemia or sickle cells, you should be well aware. So there is a loophole of awareness program in this program. And how we solve this, I think I'll have to stop here. Later on I can say how we looked into it. And another question may be, why is Oman, until now, primary screening is just optional, not compulsory, while our colleagues in the GCC are mandatory.
We will advocate for it
Huh?
from here. We will advocate for it from here.
Okay.
خلاص. And we will follow up with the questions you asked just after we go to Raya. We talked about premarital testing, and it's still a thing we need to work on in our region. You come from the region yourself. You're now currently based in the UK. But now we are talking in genetics in something beyond premarital testing and embryonic testing. We're talking about genetically modified babies. Some ethicists, they say it's completely right and justifiable. It saves the parents lots of trouble in the future and so on. But others believe completely the opposite. What's your take on it, Raya?
No, there is no position.
No, sorry, Archbishop, it's Raya with us. Just give us a second, Raya, to get your voice in the room. We're not hearing you. Can you please plug Raya? Is it okay now? We still can't hear. Okay, we have a technical issue reaching Raya. Okay. So yeah, then the question will go to you, Archbishop, and then to Dr. Ghali, because it's a very ethically controversial topic. As soon as we have Raya back, we'll get her point of view on it. So Archbishop, yes, I'm sorry. I cut you, and then God finds his way.
About genetic testing of children, yes. No, I didn't know. Behind me, yes. No, there is no opposition in principle to the genetic search for factors that predispose an individual to increase the risk of a certain disease. Mm-hmm. The ultimate goal for the adult is to put in place a series of measures to prevent or delay it. In addition, testing can lead in general to earlier development of appropriate therapeutics. The other problems involved concern the fact that the predictions which respect the timing and severity are uncertain and can lead to speculative over-medication of society. Possible psychological negativities, social and workplace discrimination, insurance price increases, etc. Difficulties in ensuring equity in access to medical care. The management of genetic information and issues of informed consent, privacy, and confidentiality. In children, issues surrounding their ability to give informed consent. In any case, in principle, predictive medicine can have decidedly positive effects in the lives of patients. Its frequency depends on the availability of effective techniques, its ethical, social, and legal implication, the adequate training of doctors, ethics committees, health professionals, citizens, and the patients, their proxies, particularly families, when patients cannot give consent. All this requires further study and reflection in the years to come. The field is really delicate. We have to lead in an ethical and human perspective to respect the dignity of everybody.
Thank you very much, Archbishop. Raya, we'll try again. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we can hear you perfectly. So I was asking you, there's a lot of controversy around genetically modified babies. Are we for or not? What do you think of it?
Essentially, it's a personal choice. but I don't agree with most of the panelists. I think having a genetically modified babies where parents get used the ability, the hair color, the eye color, etc. It's a dangerous tool because instead of dealing with discrimination, prejudice against people with disability, we're putting the onus on the person rather than society. What is society's role in making the world a better place for people with disability, with condition? You talk about rare condition. I was born with a rare condition. At the time I was born was in the late 70s. There was no screening that you have now for certain conditions. I wasn't expected to live beyond the age of 11. Um, Thanks to technology and science, I started using a ventilator at the age of 12, which has kept me alive, basically. So I think this idea that people with their condition, that's it, they do, is a very dangerous idea because you are putting a limit on a person's life and not acknowledging that nature, science, society can make a difference in a person's life. Probably because I changed countries, as I said, the ventilator, wheelchair, etc. All these things contributed to me living longer. I graduated from university. I did a master's degree. So this idea that just because someone's got a condition, they are a burden on their family or a financial burden on society, it's is not the right way to approach this. I think what we can do is change people's ideas, change their attitude, make the world more acceptable, more accepting. So rather making all children of us belonging to a certain health or ability or at least why don't we change society? If for example, at the moment we have a climate crisis. We're not changing the climate, but people are changing their behavior by recycling, by changing their living habits. So why is it with disability we have to change the child rather than change society?
I completely agree with you, Raya, that this preventive, as they would call it, is also discrimination against people with disabilities. So I do agree with you on that perspective. And you are a living example of how the struggle and how some people can make it despite all the medical diagnosis and predictions.
And just to add, the other thing is I'm not against having a test like that if your child is going to be disabled or not, because I don't think as parents is equipped to handle the responsibility of a disabled child. And I think it is a personal choice. I'm not against people who decide to abort their child if they have disabilities, because it's not just about, oh no, I'm going to have it. I think you've got to really think hard and consider, am I going to be able to cope? Am I going to give this child the best life that we can have? So I'm not against that. I am against making society one brand where, we deal with discrimination by changing the child rather than changing people.
No, I agree with you. I got your point because the main question was about genetically modified babies. And in that sense, it's not like testing and deciding, can I give this child a decent life or not at an age where our beliefs accept it or not. But in genetically modified babies, it's like we're putting standard that this is how all babies should be like. So this is where I agree with you that it's a little bit discriminatory. Dr. Ghali, from Islamic ethical perspective, this is the most controversial part of all this genetic testing. Are genetically modified babies accepted ethically? Is aborting an embryo at which stage is it accepted ethically in Islam or not?
Thank you so much. About genetic modification or genetic intervention in babies, what we call germline gene editing. This is much more, ethically speaking, much more controversial than gene editing for an adult cell, for humans who are already born, for different reasons. One of them, the germline gene editing, so far, cannot be reversed. So we take a decision, and the child and the coming generations will live with it. If they change their mind or not, we can hardly reverse this. So it's a one-time decision taken and affects generations to come. The second, these people who will be affected are not there when we take the decision. We cannot take their informed consent or their consent in whatever way. There are different religious scholars who would say that this is a decision that parents, like any other decision that parents can do on behalf of their children in their capacity of the legal guardians. However, the scope of the choice here is much wider and more impactful than any other decision. These are decisions that people cannot reverse, cannot change, not only about one person, but generations to come. Still, I would say, difficult to speak about majority, minority here, but a good number of religious scholars would accept it, as long as we speak about a genetic condition, so a kind of medical treatment, not enhancement. So we have a genetic condition that causes suffering, life-limiting suffering for the family, for the baby, etc. Can we use genetic intervention in order to change this at the germline gene set, gene editing? Many would say that it's possible. Of course, there are some who would say no for other reasons. About the moral standing of the embryo. There are some scholars, still in a minority, but there are some scholars supported by different scientists saying that the moral standing of an embryo is the same like a human being from the moment of fertilization, even before implantation in the uterus. It's a human being, so you cannot touch, you cannot change, you cannot do anything. But this is a minority. The majority of the religious scholars speak about the red line of 120 days after pregnancy. This is the moment of breathing the soul, and this is when the embryo or the fetus gets the status of a human being. So before this, if you do genetic intervention or if you do abortion or whatever, you are not killing a human being. Those who adopt this position about the moral understanding are much more permissive than the others who would say everything should be blocked from the beginning. But before implantation and before fertilization, in the Islamic perspective, with any stretch of imagination, we do not speak about a human being. So the sperm alone is not a human being, the egg alone is not a human being, and it's not because of the scientific discoveries. We also have scriptural evidence when the prophetic traditions speak about the two waters, al-ma'an. So there is a contribution from the man, a contribution from the woman. Without having this dual contribution, there is no human being. Like in this case, premarital genetic testing and so on. These things are much easier to be accepted, and people can be permissive about it. The last point I want to say here for this point is that we should make a very clear line between using medicine in general or genetics in particular to avoid or to minimize genetic conditions. This is something. and even the religious scholars who would go as far as possible to permit them. This is something. And speaking about the dignity of humans who would be born with genetic conditions or disabilities or whatever. My first book is on Islam and disability. And then I moved to the genetics and this stuff. So I can speak based on my research from an Islamic perspective, and I believe other religious perspectives, even non-religious moral traditions. Humans have an inherent dignity because they are humans. In Islam, because they are created by God. And are they created by God in a particular way? Anything else will not affect us. So being poor, rich, strong, weak, able-bodied, disabled, whatever term we give, this will not change the dignity. So societies, families need more awareness about this. So we try to avoid having cancer. But if I have cancer, will this make me less human than those who do not have? Not at all. So, by the way, on the contrary, in Islam, people who live with calamities and difficulties and suffering, they get more rewards because they have ibtila, as we call it in Arabic, much more difficulties. So this will never, and should never negatively affect the human dignity of the people. But also accepting this doesn't mean we should never interfere and let the people, as many disabled as possible, people with difficulties as possible. Not. Maybe we can say something like this if we are in Europe, or if we are in a rich country like Qatar, because you have health insurance coverage, but what about other countries where people will have great suffering? And you say to them, don't do this because this will affect the dignity. These are two things that should remain separate. In moral thought, I totally understand that societies do not always make this distinction between the two. We try to avoid the suffering as much as possible, but once we have it, we accept it. So nobody wants to be poor, at least many do not. But if I am poor, I will accept it. I will accept it. I have to accept it. I don't want to be sick, but if I fall ill, I have to accept it, and so on. So this is my point.
If anyone has a question, please raise your hand. We have the lady here. I'll wait for you because the mic is not so far out. The lady here. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this very important conversation so far. I'm working in the children's hospital, tertiary children's hospital, and we are seeing very vulnerable and sick babies there. And my question is about breast milk. Islam is very highlighting the importance of breastfeeding, and this is so right. But we are facing all over the world the problem that the most vulnerable, premature and sick babies tend to have very early formula because mothers are in the difficult situation. There are so many different reasons for that. So many countries try to solve this question with breast milk banks. My question is, knowing about Islamic milk kinship, other religious, cultural beliefs, and we don't want to be in conflict with that, is there any possibility to have a breast milk bank in Qatar, a rich country, to avoid these very vulnerable babies to be exposed to formula too early? Thank you so much.
Who could answer that? Dr. Ghali.
Yes, thank you so much for the question. I wrote 2 papers on this question about milk banking in Islamic perspectives on milk banking. They are available on internet. They can be downloaded for free. And I was approached by an international company in milk banking who found it quite strange that the Middle East does not have any single milk bank. Although
we have it, we have the custom of having sisters in breast milk.
Although they have also early-born babies who need milk and so on. So I told them that we have a religious and cultural issue about this, that milk also creates kinship. It's not only blood kinship and not only marital kinship, but there is also milk kinship. Milk creates kinship. The problem with the Western model of milk banking system, there is anonymity for the donors. So we cannot know those who donated. And if we want to know those who donated, you need special permissions because this is about respecting the privacy of the people, etc. And then you need a huge database. Who donated, how much did they donate, who received, and their children, and these children will get married after 20, 30 years. So you have to, so it's commercially speaking undoable. To cut it short, I gave my advice to the people. Based on my research, you have two options. Number one, you minimize the number of the donors and reveal the identity. So we give milk to the child only from one woman. So one woman giving to one child. So we minimize the possibility of kinship and then we reveal it. And in the informed consents, we need to have this and database and so on. This is one option. The other option is maximize the number of donors so that there will be no kinship whatsoever. Because milk kinship needs a minimum threshold. Not every drop of breastfeeding will create kinship. We speak about, normally speaking, 5 to 10, let's say, feeding sessions. So full feeding sessions, 5 full feeding sessions. If the child receives less than 5, the donor will not be a mother, will not be a milk mother. So I understood from this international company that they can do about 300 milk from 300 donors in one feeding session. So the possibility that there will be, with any stretch of imagination, kinship between the child and the donor is just not there. So the answer, is there a possibility? Yes, there are possibilities, and I wrote 2 articles. The second of them was about this, the policy making and what kind of advice we can do to the people. It just needs implementation. But I'm happy to discuss with any of the authorities here want to discuss about the possibility. There are possibilities.
So we need to push also the companies to invest a little bit more into making sure that all these requirements.
We cannot adopt the Western model as it stands now.
Okay.
There must be changes. And these changes to accommodate the religious and cultural context in the Middle East. But these modifications are not always so expensive or so impossible to do.
I have another friend, Nawal, who has a question for you. The mic is not.
It's on. Hi, everyone. So I'm someone with a disability. I wanted to know, this can be, one thing, I believe in scientific progress, right? We cannot stop that. We cannot stop the development of technologies. But with all of this in mind, do you think that there should be monitoring so we don't, I like to go back to history. So when we look at the Nazi Germany, the eugenics program, and after so many governments where in Japan, in the States with their ugly laws in the 70s where people with disabilities were banned, they were, in a sense, sterilized also from having children. Where do we stop? Where do we, I believe in progress, I really believe in that. I believe in, like, we should have better health, but where do we see that we don't go in that line where we repeat history? And that can happen very easily, you know that. Slope is very there. So what is the ethical boundary of medical practitioners and how are they monitored so we don't repeat history? So that's it.
I think Sir Caulfield is the best to answer this.
So this is a really important question. And it's actually fundamentally at the heart of the concept that every life is precious and that what we shouldn't do as society is to make decisions for the individual. We should propose decisions, we should consult with the public and population, and we should never enact policies. And that is the origin, the atrocities during the Second World War, is the origin of the Nuremberg Code. I wonder if you all know here, the largest professional section membership of the Nazi Party was doctors of medicine. So there was a major societal and cultural shift, and we must globally, as a global community, it's not the job of one nation. We must do all we can to avoid genomics being used for discrimination against any individual ever. Not least because A, it's completely ethically and morally wrong. But secondly, genomics, it has the power to be such a good thing for some people if we use it wisely. It can tell us about diseases we may have in the future. It can tell us about diseases we may have now. For example, there are treatable newborn diseases which may not be diagnosed by the standard heel prick test that we use in the first week of life, but might be detected by a whole genome. And they may open up the possibility of that child receiving a treatment in their first 5 years of life that could reduce harm and disability. But if we use genomics to shape the population or to do the type of eugenic experiments that were done, which most of us, almost all of us here, will believe were absolutely wrong and should never ever happen again. So what can we do about it? I think in the modern age of social media, the internet and communications, we have to keep alert to the possibility of this. And slightly to be controversial, I have been concerned about the use of genomics to identify certain populations so they can be discriminated against. And I refer here, not intended to embarrass anyone, the use of genomic testing to identify Uyghur Muslims in China and then to discriminate against them. These uses of genomics threaten the risk that we will set the opportunities for humanity back because people will lose confidence and trust. And it's our duty, every one of us, this is not simply a state duty, every one of us need to be vigilant that this is being used for the public and human good and not for harm.
Mm-hmm. Before I go back to check if anyone of the audience has a question, I will get back to you, but I have a question for Dr. Badawi. To go on with the conversation you launched, the mic is here on this side. How do you solve the problem you have in Oman? How do you make it legally binding to have the premarital testing? Because we're still talking at a stage, a very early stage that needs to be implemented in the society.
After looking at the premarital screening test in the whole region, we had to travel we wanted to find out why Bahrain, single in the GCC, has been very successful in combating inherited blood disorders, almost to 0.04%. They have really cut down the sickle cell outbreak for the newborn. The reason was the timing, which was very poor in the whole region, that they started a campaign whereby all secondary school children, in confidentiality, every girl and every boy before Thanawi Amma, they know that their status, whether they are free or career or affected. And from that, when they go to the college, then they know where to propose. That helped Bahrain a lot, although it may be a small country, but they managed it very successfully. Other regions were very successful, Sardinia, Iran, because of their loose laws regarding abortion, whereby they do prenatal screening. When it is the embryos is affected, then they go to abortion. But in the region, abortion, as well said by Dr. Muhammad, is highly, there are strict conditions led to abortion. The same applies to Oman, whereby if it is congenital abnormalities, but it has to be signed by 3 doctors, 2 seniors and 1, and it has to be before 4 months, 10 days, that is installment. Or abortion is allowed at any stage if the mother, his life is in danger. For example, it is 6-month pregnancy and she developed breast cancer. She has to go for chemotherapy. Bearing the pregnancy with cancer proliferate the disease. So in that case, akhafu dararain will be applied because definitely the chemotherapy will destroy the baby. Those are the only conditions where abortion is allowed. So other countries, they have loose laws about abortion, having thalassemia or sickle cell warrant abortion. But in the region, no, prenatal diagnosis is a problem because it promotes abortion, and there's no justification for abortion for thalassemia or sickle cell disease. So the concept is we designed a 4-in-1 policy. That is screening for those who wanted to get married 3 months before marriage, when no arrangements has been made, and then screening all unmarried boys and girls, screening them, and also screening the newborn. In this case, we were about to start this project when we had the COVID-19. That is the challenge we were facing it. Now the question is, why other Gulf countries could not reach what achieved, although it is compulsory, and Bahrain did it because of the wrong timing, as I said. They only wait until just 1 week before marriage, and that is the wrong concept. It has to be done much earlier. And that's why we are planning to have 4-in-1, but we were stopped because of COVID, and we are in the process of doing it to make it compulsory. The compulsory in a sense of premarital screening, but akhdan in natija, it's optional. And another issue which is prevailing in the Gulf is counseling. We don't have enough counselors for positive results, for proper counseling. And counseling is very, very important for the stigmatization and discrimination.
The lady in the back has a question.
Can you hear? Okay. Hello. Thank you very much for this very interesting topic. I have 2 questions. The first one is about if we have, in the Islamic point of view, when we have the test for Down syndrome, it's usually after 120 days of conception. So, and this test will not tell you definite 100%. It will tell you 70% likely to have, Down syndrome. So if we have a percent of how much is it, in Islamic religion, we can say, okay, 70%, so I have 30%, the baby will be normal. And 70%, I will have a baby with Down syndrome. So it's not definite. This is my first question. My second question is, during my 30 years experience in healthcare, I have witnessed many genetic disorders and from the same, families. So I keep on asking myself why I have a family with 3 kids out of 4 who have sickle cell anemia, for example, or 2 out of 4. When can we stop this family from bringing more children? And who can do this? Because you cannot tell a family stop childbearing because you have 3 out of 4, and they keep on coming with a new child with the genetic disorder. So who is responsible for, telling this family you have to stop having more children with genetic disorders? Thank you very much.
Yes, please.
Dr. Muhammad, according to our policies in Oman, once the pregnancy is 4 months, 10 days, it's just ibtila. There's nothing you can do about it because you have to carry the pregnancy to term, and it's just bad luck. So that is, although it's very hurting, but abortion will not be allowed after 4 months, 10 days, unless there is a justification for it. Now, another issue, and then Dr. Muhammad may comment about this issue, that is personal issue from Omani National Births Committee. And the second issue is about?
The second issue about how families who have...
yes. We have encountered numerous cases for this in Oman. And the only option, although it's not affordable to every family, is PGD, pre-implantation diagnosis test, whereby before the embryo is inserted. Because once the 2 families are carriers, then the chances are there. So I mean, otherwise to take chances is either abstaining from having children, and that is why I said there is a very serious problem in the whole region regarding counseling and advisory, and that is the results of this. Otherwise, PGD is the only solution to the best of my knowledge. Otherwise, prenatal screening, it won't tell you anything except whether to go abortion or to accept the results, which is sometimes is very hurting. That you know that you have got 2 children with sickle cell and the third one on the way is also affected. The result is from prenatal screening. So it adds to the bitter taste. Dr. Muhammad.
Dr. Muhammad.
As for the question about abortion,
of Down syndrome.
Down syndrome, yes. The red line I mentioned, 120 days. After 120 days, we do not have, for the best of my knowledge, any religious scholar, recognized religious scholar that would say it's possible, unless the life of the mother is in danger, not the health. The life of the mother is in danger. So you have to choose between the life of the mother and the life of the child. So we choose the life of the mother because the life of the mother is certain. The life of the child is uncertain. Maybe anything can happen. Anyhow, so before this, we have fatwas, like the fatwa from the Islamic Fiqh Academy in Mecca, saying that it's possible under conditions. There is a fatwa about aborting a child with genetic conditions, with this title. And we spoke about it in the report. And they said up to 120 days. And by the way, the calculation is not the medical calculation. So 120 calculated from the moment of fertilization. So about 8 days later than, or 2 weeks, something like this. So from the moment of fertilization. They say it's possible under conditions, the suffering of the child, the life-limiting disease, the 2 parents, they insist having them, etc. I personally would say, taking the decision of abortion is not a medical one. It's a holistic decision. So it's not only about the medical condition of the child. There are also parents who have a say in this. So we cannot say that parents who were struggling to have a child and they didn't have any will be the same in their decision like those who have already 5 children with this genetic condition. The parents who are living in a country like Qatar will not be the same like those who are living in conflict areas like in Yemen or Syria, or they are not the same. So it's a very complex decision. And that's why I always say there should be an ethics committee, a case-by-case basis, and parents should be involved with good genetic counseling in that. Thank you.
By the way, that was not a very important sound. It's just a mic that fell off in the other room. So but yeah, this is how we amplify things. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for this very lovely panel. I would have loved to discuss more. I have so many about abortion and the ethics around it. But thank you very much. Our time is up. Dr. Muhammad Ghali, Professor of Islam and Biomedical Ethics at HBKU. Dr. Ahmed Al-Badawi, Bioethicist at the National Bioethics Committee in Sultan Qaboos University in Oman. Professor Sir Mark Caulfield, Vice Principal of Health, Professor of Clinical Pharmacology at Queen Mary University of London, and CEO of Bart's Life Sciences. I was trying to find which one I should go for. In summary, I couldn't find it. And Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia, President of the Pontifical Academy of Life, and Raya Al-Jader, writer of Disability Horizons. Thank you very much, and see you later in the next panel.